Medieval peasants lived brutal, short lives, yet their bread wouldn't trigger the gluten sensitivities plaguing millions today. Same wheat, same human bodies, completely different reaction. Scientists finally tested 800-year-old recipes and discovered we've been baking bread wrong for exactly 72 years. What changed? The village mill wasn't just a building. It was a power structure. Medieval lords didn't just own the land. They owned the only machine that could turn grain into something edible. And they charged peasants every single time they used it. We're talking about a tax on flour, a tax on the most basic food that existed. Here's where it gets interesting. Those massive stone wheels that ground the grain, they worked slowly, painfully slowly. But that slowness actually did something remarkable. Stone grinding produces way less heat than the steel rollers we use today, and heat destroys nutrients. Specifically, it wrecks vitamins B, 1, and E before they ever reach your stomach. So medieval peasants, without knowing any of this, were accidentally preserving vitamins that modern factories cook right out of existence. One mill served around 200 families. Women would walk miles with grain strapped to their backs just to get it ground. Miles. And then pay a fee for the privilege. Now, some peasants got clever. They kept hand querns hidden at home. Little manual grinders they could use in secret. If the Lord found out, fines, confiscation, sometimes worse. People risked punishment just to make their own flour. That's how valuable bread was. But here's the part nobody talks about. That coarse, uneven flour those stones produced, it contained the entire wheat kernel, bran, germ, everything. The fiber content in one slice of their bread beat 5 slices of the whole wheat you buy at the grocery store. They weren't health gurus, they just didn't have the technology to remove the good stuff. And that coarse texture, it created something else entirely. Something that required a very different kind of rising process. Commercial yeast didn't show up until the 1870s. Let that sink in. For thousands of years, every single loaf of bread relied on wild fermentation, airborne bacteria, random yeast floating through the kitchen. That's it. No packets, no jars, just patience and a little bit of faith. Peasant women kept something called mother dough alive for years, sometimes decades. They'd pinch off a piece before baking, mix it with fresh flour and water, and let it grow again. Daughters inherited these starters like jewelry. Grandmothers passed them down like secret recipes. And here's what made this slow process actually matter. The 12 to 24-hour fermentation didn't just make bread rise, it broke down phytic acid. Never heard of it? Phytic acid is basically a nutrient thief. It binds to iron, zinc, and magnesium in your gut and escorts them right out of your body. You eat the minerals, but absorb almost nothing. Long fermentation destroys most of that phytic acid. Suddenly, the same flour delivers way more nutrition. But wait, there's more. The lactic acid bacteria in sourdough actually pre-digest gluten proteins. They start breaking down the stuff that gives so many people stomach trouble today. Medieval bread was literally easier to digest than the improved version we eat now. My grandmother kept a starter going for 40 years. 40 years! I killed mine in 3 weeks by forgetting to feed it. Twice. Some bakeries today claim their starters are over 100 years old. That sour taste everyone either loves or hates, it wasn't a flaw. It meant the bread would last longer, resist mold better, and deliver more nutrients per bite. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The flour they used was nothing like what sits in your pantry. Here's the thing about medieval flour that nobody talks about. When a peasant woman ground her wheat, she got everything. The bran, the germ, the endosperm, all of it, crushed together into one coarse, brownish flour. Not by choice, mind you, she literally couldn't separate them. That would require roller mills, sifting technology, and about 500 years of industrial progress. So she used the whole grain because that's all there was. Turns out that limitation was a nutritional jackpot. The wheat germ alone, that tiny little heart of the kernel, packed vitamin E, healthy fats, and protein. Modern white flour completely removes it. Gone. Tossed out like yesterday's garbage. Then there's the bran. Roughly 12 grams of fiber per cup. White flour delivers less than 1 gram. That's not a small difference. That's like comparing a marathon to walking to your mailbox. But wait, here's where it gets interesting. The nobility actually preferred white bread. They saw dark bread as peasant food, something beneath them, a status symbol in reverse. They'd pay extra for lighter, fluffier loaves, while the poor folks ate the nutritionally superior version. Rich people literally bragging about eating worse food. Some things never change, I guess. Now, this peasant flour had one serious flaw. It spoiled fast. Those oils in the wheat germ go rancid within weeks. No preservatives, no refrigeration. You bake it, you eat it, you move on. Modern enriched flour tries to fix what processing broke. It adds back 5 nutrients. Sounds helpful, right? Well, the original grain contained over 20. So we're putting back a quarter of what we removed and calling it enriched. That's like stealing someone's car, returning the floor mats, and expecting a thank you card. But spoilage wasn't the only challenge peasants faced with their bread. Here's where things get really interesting. That long fermentation wasn't just about making bread rise. It was doing something almost magical to the flour itself. When dough sits for 12 to 24 hours, enzymes wake up. They start breaking down complex starches into simpler sugars. Sounds bad, right? Like the bread would spike your blood sugar even faster? The opposite happens. Those simpler sugars get partially consumed by the bacteria during fermentation. What's left behind absorbs into your bloodstream gradually, not all at once. Medieval peasants eating their slow-fermented bread experienced steady energy. Modern folks eating quick-rise bread, they're on a glucose roller coaster. But wait, it gets better. The extended rise actually creates B vitamins that weren't in the original flour. The bread becomes more nutritious during fermentation. I still find this wild. You start with ingredients, do nothing but wait, and end up with more nutrients than you began with. Try that with a microwave dinner. Then there's the gluten situation. A 24-hour ferment reduces gluten content by up to 80% compared to a 2-hour commercial rise. 80%. That's not a small difference. That's why your grandmother could eat bread daily without issues while you bloat up like a balloon after one sandwich. And those FODMAPs everyone talks about now, the carbohydrates that make sensitive stomachs feel like they're hosting a wrestling match, long fermentation breaks those down too. The bacteria were doing work that our digestive systems would otherwise struggle with, pre-digesting the bread before it ever hit anyone's stomach. No labs, no scientists, no fancy equipment, just time and patience. So medieval bread lasted longer, digested easier, and delivered more nutrients. But here's something nobody expected about how long that bread actually survived. Here's the thing about medieval bread that nobody talks about. It could sit on your table for a week. No mold, no fuzzy green spots, nothing. Meanwhile, my store-bought loaf starts looking like a science experiment after 4 days in the plastic bag it came in. Medieval households only fired up their ovens once or twice a week. Why? Because heating a stone oven required enough firewood to make your back hurt just thinking about it. So when baking day came, you made enough bread to last. And somehow, it did. The secret wasn't some medieval preservative we lost. It was everything working together. The acid from all that slow fermentation created an environment where mold basically said, nope, not living here. The dense texture from coarse flour didn't trap moisture the way fluffy modern bread does. Then there's the crust. These loaves developed thick, armor-like crusts from wood-fired ovens hitting 500 degrees or higher. That crust acted like natural packaging, protecting the soft inside from contamination and keeping air out. But the storage method mattered too. Peasants wrapped bread in cloth or stored it in wooden boxes, not plastic. The bread could breathe. Moisture escaped instead of creating that soggy mess we all know too well. And when bread finally did go stale, nobody threw it away. Stale bread became trenchers, basically edible plates that soaked up meat juices. It thickened soups. It transformed into bread pudding. Every crumb had a purpose. Here's what gets me. Modern bread contains calcium propionate and other preservatives specifically designed to prevent mold. Yet it still goes bad faster than medieval bread made with just 4 ingredients. Speaking of community, the way bread was actually baked tells us something surprising about medieval village life. Most peasants couldn't afford their own ovens. Think about it. Building an oven meant hauling stones, mixing mortar, and burning through firewood just to heat the thing up once. So entire villages shared a single bakehouse, usually owned by the lord, of course, because why miss a chance to collect more fees? Here's where it gets interesting. When 20 families bring their dough to the same oven on the same day, how do you know which loaf is yours? They all look the same going in. Medieval women solved this with family patterns. They'd score unique designs into their dough before baking. A cross, 3 slashes, a spiral. These weren't decorations, they were signatures. And baking day? It became a social event. The original networking mixer, except instead of awkward small talk over cheap wine, women actually exchanged useful information. Bread techniques, gossip, who had extra grain, who needed help. Recipes passed mouth to mouth because almost nobody could write them down. But there's a practical benefit nobody talks about. The communal system meant every loaf hit the same scorching temperatures, 500 degrees or higher from those wood fires, no underbaked centers, no raw dough disasters. The thick crusts that modern home bakers struggle to achieve, medieval women got them automatically because their ovens ran hotter than your self-cleaning cycle. My grandmother used to say the best conversations happened over shared work. She was right. Generations of bread knowledge survived because women stood together waiting for loaves to bake. No cookbooks, no YouTube tutorials, just people talking while they worked. But here's something unexpected about what was actually inside those loaves. Because wheat wasn't always the star ingredient. In many regions, peasants rarely touched it at all. Wheat gets all the glory. Always has. But here's the thing. Most medieval peasants couldn't grow it. Wheat is picky. It wants good soil, mild winters, and just the right amount of rain. Basically, wheat is the high-maintenance friend of the grain world. So what did people actually eat? Rye, barley, oats. Sometimes a wild mix called maslin, which was whatever grains happened to grow together in the same field. And honestly, these lesser grains were nutritional powerhouses. Rye bread, the dense, dark loaves from Northern Europe, fermented beautifully and packed more fiber than wheat ever could. German and Scandinavian peasants lived on this stuff for centuries. They weren't suffering, they were thriving. Then there's barley. Scottish and Irish families survived harsh winters on barley bread. Not glamorous, but it delivered something special. Beta-glucans. These compounds actually lower cholesterol. Medieval peasants were accidentally eating heart-healthy bread before anyone knew what cholesterol even was. Here's what gets overlooked. When you combine different grains, something interesting happens. Maslin bread, that wheat and rye mixture, provided complementary amino acids. Neither grain alone offered complete protein. Together, much closer to it. My grandmother used to say variety was nature's insurance policy. She meant vegetables, but grains worked the same way. Modern farming went the opposite direction. We chose wheat monoculture. One grain, everywhere. It's efficient, sure, but we traded nutritional diversity for convenience. Now, I should mention rye had one terrifying problem: ergot fungus. When it infected rye crops, people who ate the contaminated bread experienced violent hallucinations, convulsions, and burning sensations in their limbs. Entire villages went temporarily insane. Historians believe some witch trials were actually ergot poisoning, so medieval bread could literally drive you mad. But the grains themselves, that's only half the story. What really changed everything came later, and it involved steel rollers. Steel roller mills changed everything in the 1870s, and I mean everything. Before that, separating bran and germ from the white endosperm took forever. Skilled millers, multiple passes through stones. The whole process was slow, expensive, and honestly, not worth the trouble for most people. Then engineers figured out steel rollers could do in seconds what stones took hours to accomplish. Suddenly, white flour cost almost nothing to produce. Here's where it gets interesting. Removing the germ wasn't just about making pretty flour. It was about money. See, that germ contains oils. Oils go rancid. Rancid flour doesn't sell. But take the germ out, your flour now lasts years instead of weeks. You can ship it across oceans, store it in warehouses, build an empire. And they did. Around the same time, Louis Pasteur's yeast discoveries gave bakers commercial yeast that worked in 2 hours flat. Remember those 24-hour fermentation times? Gone. Those family starters passed down through generations, thrown in the garbage like yesterday's newspaper. Why would anyone wait a full day when you could finish in 2 hours? Bread factories popped up everywhere. Thousands of identical loaves rolling off assembly lines daily. Village bakers couldn't compete with those prices. My grandmother told me her mother cried when their local bakery closed. 70 years of family bread making finished. But here's what really sealed the deal: marketing. The new white bread looked clean, modern, scientific. Traditional dark loaves, those became symbols of poverty, backwardness. Nobody wanted to eat peasant food when they could afford the shiny new option. Within one generation, centuries of bread-making wisdom just vanished. So, what exactly did we lose in that trade? The answer might make you rethink your morning toast. Modern milling removes approximately 80% of the fiber, 70% of the B vitamins, gone. Nearly all the vitamin E, stripped out completely. But here's where it gets insulting. The flour industry looked at this nutritional disaster and said, no problem, we'll just add some stuff back. They called it enriched flour. Sounds generous, right? Like they're giving you something extra. They're not. Enrichment adds back exactly 5 nutrients: iron, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, and folic acid. 5. Meanwhile, they removed over 24 beneficial compounds that existed in the original grain. That's like someone stealing your entire wallet, then handing back a few coins and expecting gratitude. The wheat germ alone contains zinc, magnesium, phosphorus, and selenium. Enrichment programs ignore all of these entirely. Nobody's adding those back. Too expensive, too complicated, not legally required. Then there's the stuff most people have never heard of. Lignans, phenolic acids, ferulic acid. These compounds don't have catchy names, but modern research links them to reduced inflammation and protection against heart disease. All removed, none replaced. Here's a number that stopped me cold. A slice of commercial white bread contains about 0.6 grams of fiber. Medieval peasant bread, 4 to 5 times more per slice. Same basic ingredient, completely different food. And the brand they throw away? It contained antioxidants that pharmaceutical companies now study for their health benefits. We literally discard nutrients, then spend billions researching how to get them back. The peasants didn't know the science. They couldn't name vitamins or explain antioxidants, but they ate the whole grain because that's all they had. Now we know exactly what we're missing. And we still choose the stripped-down version, but removing nutrients was only half the problem. What we added to replace them? That's where things get genuinely concerning. Modern commercial bread reads like a chemistry exam. Flip over that plastic bag and count the ingredients. Go ahead, I'll wait. If you hit 30 before running out of breath, congratulations, you're eating average American bread. Medieval bread? 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt, and whatever wild yeast happened to float by. That's it. Your great-great-great-grandmother would faint reading today's labels. Let's talk about calcium propionate. Sounds fancy, right? It's the stuff preventing mold from turning your sandwich green. Works great for that. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Clinical studies found links between this preservative and irritability in children. Some kids got restless, fidgety, harder to manage. We're literally adding mood-altering chemicals to sandwich bread. Then there's azotocarbonamide. Try saying that 3 times fast. This dough conditioner makes bread fluffier and speeds up production. Know what else it's used for? Yoga mats. Same chemical. The European Union banned it. Australia banned it. America? Still perfectly legal in your morning toast. And the sweetness, the sweetness nobody asked for. High fructose corn syrup sneaks into breads that have no business being sweet. Medieval peasants would be completely baffled. Bread isn't dessert, folks. Potassium bromate deserves special mention. International health agencies classify it as a possible carcinogen. California requires warning labels on products containing it. Yet bakers still use it because it makes dough stronger and rise higher. We're trading potential cancer risk for fluffier dinner rolls. Here's what really gets me. Modern bread stays fresh for weeks, sealed in plastic. That same plastic would have rotted medieval bread within days. The preservatives keeping your loaf soft are doing things to bread that nature never intended. But the ingredient list is just one problem. What happens after you eat this bread matters even more, especially to your blood sugar. Here's where things get personal for your pancreas. Commercial bread fermented for only 2 hours produces a glycemic index around 75. For reference, pure glucose scores 100. So that fluffy sandwich bread, it's basically sugar wearing a wheat costume. Traditional sourdough with long fermentation scores closer to 54. Same basic ingredients, completely different effect on your blood sugar. Why such a massive difference? The mechanical kneading and rapid rising of factory bread creates that spongy texture we've all come to expect. Light, airy, soft. Also digests almost instantly. Your body barely has to work to break it down. It hits your bloodstream like you mainlined a candy bar. Medieval bread was dense, chewy. The kind of loaf that fights back when you bite it. And that density, combined with all that fiber and the pre-digested starches from fermentation, meant energy released slowly over hours. Peasants spent their days doing backbreaking labor in fields. They needed fuel that lasted, not a sugar rush followed by a crash at noon. Their bread delivered exactly that. Americans now consume about 50 pounds of commercial bread per person annually. That's a lot of blood sugar spikes, a lot of insulin responses, a lot of afternoons wondering why you're exhausted after lunch. Studies show that sourdough bread produces 25% lower blood glucose responses than the exact same recipe made with commercial yeast. Same flour, same water, same salt. The only difference is time. We traded sustained energy for convenience. Our ancestors would think we're insane, but fast blood sugar isn't the only modern addition to our daily bread. The ingredient list on most commercial loaves reads like a chemistry exam. And some of those chemicals, they're banned in other countries for good reason. Here's the good news. You don't need a time machine to eat like a medieval peasant. Modern bakers who've rediscovered long fermentation keep hearing the same thing from customers. I couldn't eat bread for years, but yours doesn't bother me. That's not magic. That's just giving dough enough time to do what dough wants to do. Stone ground flour from small mills costs more than the industrial stuff. No way around that, but you're actually getting what you paid for. Nutrients that factory milling strips out for the sake of shelf life. My grandmother would call that penny wise, pound foolish. She was usually right, and the weird part is, starting your own sourdough takes about a week. Flour, water, a jar. That's literally it. No special equipment, no expensive gadgets, just patience, which admittedly is the one ingredient most of us struggle to find. The results speak for themselves, though. Switching from commercial bread to traditionally fermented sourdough can increase mineral absorption by up to 60%. Same ingredients, different process, wildly different outcome. Farmers markets and artisan bakeries now sell breads using methods nearly identical to what medieval bakers used. They're not being trendy, they're being practical. Look, I'm not saying throw out every loaf in your pantry tomorrow, but maybe next time you're at the store, skip the bread aisle with its 30 ingredient lists. Find a local baker who actually ferments their dough, or better yet, try making your own. The peasants weren't backward, they weren't primitive. They simply lacked the technology to ruin their bread. And that turned out to be the biggest advantage of all. Sometimes progress means going back to what actually worked.